Alrighty. And hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you may happen to be. My cupcakes and co-defendants. Lovely to have you with me. I am Tad. I will be here reading for about another hour. Roughly. Well, I'll probably be babbling for a moment first, but that's nothing new now, is it? What else did I want to talk about? As you can see, we are still in the basement of Unending Horror. I'm still waiting, but as I mentioned last night, we have many new functionalities in our house, so things are moving forward. I am very happy. Our mattress is up off the floor on an actual bed. Their kitchen is now functional. We can cook in it and have a few times, more than a few times actually. And we have a couch. So we still, of course, have tons of boxes. So it's not like, everything looks normal in the upstairs. But it certainly looks more normal than it does down here. And that will be something that still has to be taken advantage of. So, what else is there to talk about? Not really much. We're having a nice day today, so in terms of the weather, so no dog freak out today, which is always nice because Johnny is such a sweet dog. He really doesn't deserve to have to go through the trials of the damned every time there's a storm. But, it's nothing we can do anything about. He's already on drugs. He's on doggy drugs, he's on all kinds of stuff, and of course he gets a lot of tender loving care from us when he has freakouts. I oftentimes don't know about the freakouts until a large dog paw starts scraping at my skin, oftentimes in the middle of the night, and I wake up or my attention turns and there is a large dog standing next to me with a very worried look on his face, trying to let me know that something very bad is happening. And that very bad something is usually rain, which, as you can guess, there's not much I can do about. So at that point, I just try to soothe him for a little bit. And then, because I read, I don't know if it's true, but it seems to make sense to me that if you make too big of a deal of comforting animals when they're upset, then they may come to believe that there really is something wrong. Whereas if you just give them comfort but don't overdo it, they will understand, or at least have a better understanding, that this is just normal life and there's nothing to be afraid of. So I don't know. It's one of those things that you just do your best. You just do your best. I've often thought that Johnny was actually extremely lucky to wind up with us because, as I've mentioned before, we have a lot of neurodivergence in the family and all kinds of interesting people with all kinds of skills and smarts and very kind people too, but so we're used to slightly odd and unusual people and animals. Most of us are either unusual people or animals, and as a result, instead of being disgusted or angry or whatever when Johnny has a freak out, we just say, that's Johnny. He's got fear, he's got worry, and he can't help it. So I think I had a long not a conversation, not when I'm the one talking and nobody else gets to talk, but I had a long screed a couple of weeks ago about my own experiences with plane travel and things like that, and needing to start using some kind of drug to get over that fear, that phobia that had very little to do with reality. So no, as a matter of fact, I know I talked about it because I was talking about the first time I met Greg Bear, the beloved and missed Greg Bear. Anyway, so what else? Deb is upstairs piecing together little quilt squares, granny squares, I believe they're called. I am no expert, but I live with an expert, or at least somebody who's really devoting a great deal of her time and energy to fabric art. So she's got the dining room table covered in granny squares, which she's moving around, trying to figure out which ones go best and where and things like that. So she's doing well. Daughter's doing well. Kids one of our kids had a momentary problem today, but fortunately we have AAA and that got solved. And so yeah, nothing really exciting to report. I'm still in the last thrashing moments of Ordinary Farm, or Tinker Farm as it's called in Germany. Hoping to get that finished before we go on a trip, book signing, lecture, reading, whatever thing in Germany in a couple of months. a month and a half, whatever it is. So that's my main focus at the moment, and of course having to do stuff still with Navigator's Children, which is going to go through its proofs stage. So you guys are getting to experience all this with me, lucky you, as I go through each phase and as I become more and more sick of my own book, which is what always happens. Not that I think there's anything wrong with it. I think I did a pretty good job with it, but you can only read your own work so many times before you start wanting to gouge your own eyes out. Well, that might be a slight exaggeration, but I mean, how many times can you read a story, 1,000-page story that you already know how it ends and everything that happens along the way? And, it's a certain point you just start going, God, I hate this book. I hate it. Fortunately, it doesn't last very long because books are like your kids, that they can drive you mad, they can frustrate you and upset you, but at the end of the day, they're yours and you love them. And so, but I am in that phase where I'm perfectly ready for my book to move out and start its own life. So you can imagine. Anyway, let me check and see who is round and about and who has checked in. Let's go back to that page there and see what's happening. What is happening over on Tad's page? All right, we've got comments from Angie. Hello, Angie. Good to see you. Ivan, my dear buddy. Kristen, hello. As always, good to see you. Sherry, you too. Timothy Roberts. Hello, Timothy. Good to see you. Isaac, a pleasure. Ron, as always, a boon to have you with me. Kelly, good to see you, Kelly. And Emily, you too. Claudia, you are always welcome. Ray Weatherford, I think I'm still getting that name right. Hooray. Barban, Becca, Tim, that's Tim Speckens, and Medardo, mi amigo, Tracy, Christy. Did I ever write back to you, Medardo? If not, send me another email and remind me, because I've been a bit overwhelmed in the last week or two. Tracy, if I didn't say that already, Tracy McClatchy, hello. Excuse me, Christy, good to see you. And Susan and Rebecca Garcia, a pleasure to have you with me. So, crocheting granny squares, most likely, Tad is talking about, unless Deb picked up quilting on top of crochet. Deb is fascinated by quilting, and we actually collect quilts. I mean, Deb is the driving force behind that. Actually, one of the things that I may do once we get the office cleaned up is I may start using some of Deb's quilts, the ones she's, some of the ones she's made, but also some of the ones that we've collected. Predominantly Southern and predominantly African American. But we may start using those as a background. And let me see, what else? I think that I said hello to everybody, and I believe that everything is under control here. Somebody said, Angie said the connection is unstable. Okay, I don't see any issue with it on my end, but if it does come up again, somebody please let me know. I am going to go ahead in just a moment and start reading. Sorry, Angie, what I didn't finish saying there, because I got led astray, was that Deb is mostly does crochet herself. We collect quilts, and Deb is interested in quilts and quilting, but Deb doesn't do quilting. Deb does, let me see if I get, now my volume I think is all the way up, so it shouldn't be me. But anyway, so that's what's going on. Deb is crocheting. That is her primary creative outlet right at the moment. So anything beyond that, any questions beyond that should be delivered to Deborah, because I am an ignorant pig about crochet. I am happy to participate in the sense of seeing what Deb does and enjoying her progress and through her projects, because of course, like all artistic ventures, whether it's fabric art, whether it's writing, whether it's creating music, whatever it may happen to be. There are certain elements of the creative process that are similar through all these particular ways of doing things and these types of creative expressions. And then there are differences, and it's fascinating to watch and to learn and to ask questions. So, and because I came out of an arts background, that was kind of what I thought I was going to be doing for the early part of my life. I'm very into color, and I'm very into color and texture and arrangements. And so visually, I just like looking at what she's doing and asking her why she chose this and stuff like that. So it works out well. But I don't know enough to be annoying, I hope. I'm not going, shouldn't you use blue there? Or, because that's the kind of thing that, can get a husband stabbed in the middle of the night while he's asleep. I do not pretend. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. I suspect that means that the weekly pizza delivery has just occurred upstairs. I don't know if you can hear Johnny up there. He's very loud. Okay, so with that, and aware of the fact that there may be some volume issues that I can't do anything about on my end because I've done everything I can. I am going to start reading, and again, if there's any issues, let me know. Yeah, Ivan said pizza's here. Yeah, that's one good thing about having a big dog, is you can be in any part of the house or on the property, and Johnny will let you know what's going on. Okay, we are going back to the Witchwood Crown, which we are now really pretty much 3/4 of the way through, certainly more than 2/3. And we are with Vieki. We had just had a section where Aelin, who is Count Aelair of Hernestyr's grandnephew, has been captured by his own countrymen, Hugh's personal private guard. We finished that section, and we've started a new section with Vieki, who is the head of the Builders' Order. He is one of the Hikadaya, or Norns. He is also the father of Nezaru. And Vieki is traveling, and they have stopped in the middle of what he thinks of as nowhere. Turns out it's pretty damn close to where the whole scene with Aelin and the other Hernestyri mortals just happened. And he is being told that basically, don't ask questions even though you're nominally in charge of this mission. This is above your pay grade. I mean, obviously nobody says that, but that's the modern day translation. So last paragraph of that particular section, Vieki had no choice. To complain or protest would be to show himself weak, and weakness was like a fracture in rock. Eventually it would lead to collapse. He nodded. I will wait. Host singer Sogeu rode back across the storm-flattened grasses to the waiting column, appearing out of the swirling dark like something summoned by ancient arts. Her face was full of cold satisfaction. Magister Vieki, she said, as if they had met by surprise near the oil fountains in the Queen's Square. My storm singers have held the wind steady for a long, unsatisfying time, I know, but now we may ride on. Where did you go, host singer? Vieki's tone had been sharp, and he thought he saw a hint of irritation flit across the singer's features. But if he had, it was gone in an instant. To fulfill a pledge, Magister. We ride across the lands of a mortal king, and they are jealous of their privileges. They do not sell them lightly. Sell them? What do you mean? These lands belong to the mortal king, Hugh of Hernestyr. We had to buy our right to pass across them. Do you mean you have made a bargain with mortals so that our mission could proceed? Why was I not told? Sogeu folded her hands in a gesture of peaceful cooperation between partners. Because the bargain was made by our great queen herself, through my master, Lord Akinabi. She watched for a moment to see what the mention of those names would do. Vieki maintained a stony impassivity, but inside he was shaken. He was more thoroughly in Akinabi's power out here than he ever would have been at home. And what was the bargain, if I may ask, without intruding on Lord Akanabi's privilege? Oh, nothing of much import, Sogeyu told him. In exchange for his turning a blind eye to our passage, we have given the mortal king a little nothing, a bauble that he coveted. But to him it shines like a drop of dew in a spider's web, and like most mortals, he is blinded by greed for shiny things. You gave him gold? Oh, nothing so ordinary. Sogeyu shook her head. But please do not concern yourself, High Magister. King Hugh is merely another player in the king-queen's game. Although being mortal, he does not understand or appreciate his place in the greater exercise. We have done what we promised, so he will continue his useful ignorance of our presence as we make our way across his lands. We are passing beyond Hernesteer, then. Again, Vieki was shaken. Hikedaya had not traveled so far from home since the Great War. Oh, yes, said Sogeyu, content as a bird preening its feathers. We are going somewhere where you can ply your most excellent skills in furthering the Queen's design. Do not fear, Magister, your part in this is very great. When we get there, you and your laborers will astound the world. Vieki overlooked the slighting word, laborers, as if there was nothing more to the order of builders than digging and piling stone on stone. And what is our destination, host foreman? Where does the Queen's plan send us? Should be host singer. The singer bowed as to a superior, but her eyes seemed to tell a different story. Trust the mother of all, High Magister Vieki, she said soothingly. Truly my master, who has lived nearly as long as the Queen herself. They have planned carefully, and you will learn all that is expected of you, but in their time, not your own. Of course I trust the Queen, Vieki replied. She is the mother of all, but the phrase did not feel as familiar or reassuring as it usually did. Deep in thought, he rode silently back to his men as the singers raised their voices again and the winds began to scream. When the company again set off through the tunnel of angry weather, he felt as though a piece of the storm had broken loose from the whole and fastened itself to him, dazzling and confusing him with lightning and turning him cold inside. He could not imagine ever being free of it as long as he rode these unfamiliar lands among all these hidden minds. Chapter 42, Forest Music. Oops, go back. Chapter 42, Forest Music. The crowds that had seen them off from the castle and Urchester had been loud and enthusiastic and studded with nobility, like a diadem. The crowds who came out during the first part of their journey north were a great deal more humble, but even more excited to see Prince Morgan and Count Eolair, the famous Hand of the Throne. In Aldheim and Dracot and other small towns, shouting children lined the roads, and workers came to the edge of the fields, sweating and grass-stained, to watch the procession pass. But what Morgan could not understand was how such large crowds had gathered even before they arrived. Post riders, Eolair explained, carrying the crowned letters and other important papers. Sometimes money or bills of credit as well, which is why they travel armed, as you may see. Some ride daily from Merchester out to Sistan and Falshire. Others go to Stanshire or Kelledshire, stopping on the way to change horses so that a rider can travel from the Hayholt to the borders of Erkenland in only a day or two. Do you mean my grandparents are sending out letters, telling people to come and cheer for us? Morgan liked the thought of being that important, even if he didn't like the idea of the king and queen arranging it. The Count laughed. Eolair seemed in good health despite the recent attempt on his life, and showed no sign of it except the bandages he still wore on the wound to his shoulder. Morgan had seen the injury, and it was not small. He was impressed by the old man's fortitude. "Your grandparents? I think not," Aolair said. "I suspect that the post riders themselves are also delivering news of their own in the form of gossip when they stop to eat and drink. A company like ours is more than enough to catch at people's attention. You are one of the royal family, and I am known a little as well." "Perhaps your people have heard you ride with the admirable Canuck," said little Snennek from atop his mighty ram. "Always in these parts people seem happy to see trolls up close, and I am well known for my impressive size." Kina, his betrothed, thumped his arm and made a face. Benebik and Siski, riding nearby, both smiled. "I am thinking that your great size, Snennek," Kina's father said, "despite filling us with pride and delighting so many of your friends back home, is perhaps not so much to be noticed by the tall folk who live here in Erkenland." Though Benebik said it kindly, little Snennek seemed saddened by the idea that the crowds had not noticed his unusual height. He stayed quiet for a while after that. The large company rode for 3 days before they reached the border of Falshire and turned north off the river road to follow the line of the forest. After they left the broad thoroughfare, the towns gave way to villages or even single crofters' huts, and nobody came to watch them pass except the occasional smallholder leaning on his hoe. It must have been a strange sight, Morgan thought. The armored knights on their horses, foot soldiers bearing the covered litter of the dying Sitha, and her bodyguard of trolls riding rams and a huge white wolf. Those who saw it would surely remember it for the rest of their lives. Despite the variety of mounts, the company traveled faster than Morgan had expected. The weather here was hot and dry, nor were they slowed by civilians and the massive baggage train that had attended the High Throne on its progress to Rimmersgard and back. Although he was still not happy to have been forced into this journey, Morgan had to admit that riding with Count Aolair, Sir Porto, and the rest of the soldiers was closer to the way he imagined himself. A man doing the important things men did. Still, as he lay on his cloak that night, disdaining a tent like Aolair's, so he could watch the burning bright stars wheel overhead before they plunged at last into the black sea of nighttime forest, Morgan had to admit that he was lonely. But the strange part was that he could not say what exactly he missed. He missed Lilia, of course. Because of the difference in their ages, his love for his younger sister surprised him sometimes. They had not spent much of their childhoods together. By the time she could talk, he was learning how to ride and fight. Soon enough, she began protesting that she too should be taught to use a sword. That had led to some sharp words between Lilia's mother, who was completely opposed to the idea, and her grandmother, who felt there was good precedent in the family for a girl learning to protect herself. The queen had won, as queens often did, but after only a few days of instruction, Lilia had decided fighting was not as interesting as she'd thought, and wanted to learn how to ride a horse instead. During the long trip north to Elvertshalle, Morgan had grown used to not seeing her, to not being noisily awakened by her at terrible hours of the morning, or dragged out to the garden in the middle of a game of dice to see some exceptional bird or other, and the ache of her absence had subsided enough that he barely thought of it. But seeing how much she had grown in the months he was gone frightened him a little, in a way he did not understand. She had cried when he rode out this time, not even trying to hide it, which was not like the Lilia he knew, who generally only wept in frustrated anger when kept from something she badly wanted. So alive, so fierce. How could he feel so strongly about her when her own mother hardly seemed to... But at least his mother loved Lilia in her own slipshod way. Morgan's father had... With a huff of breath, he pushed the memory away, that old, terrible memory. It often came to him when he was alone, and more frequently when he was both alone and sober, one of the great reasons that he hated that combination of miseries. Will anyone else miss me? My mother? A bit, I suppose, though she did not seem overly troubled by... Let me try that again. Will anyone else miss me? My mother? A bit, I suppose, though she did not seem overly troubled by my traveling for months with grandmother Miriamel and grandfather Simon. And of course she'd be wretched if I died, because who cares for the mother of a dead heir? Morgan hoped God was not listening at this particular moment, because even as he thought it, he regretted it. It had been made very plain by Father Nullies and others over the years that loving one's parents was God's firm command. And he did his best to love his mother. He truly did. Surely God couldn't expect anything more than his best. But he couldn't understand how she could be so disinterested in her own daughter. Sometimes it seemed she scarcely saw Lilia from one day to the next, except when Countess Rona or one of the other women brought the girl to say good night. But his mother, disinterested though she might be, at least would never have said... Again, he tried to push the memory away, but this time it would not be dismissed. It rose like some fierce, toothy thing, sliding up through the water lilies in the deepest part of the Hayholt's moat. A flash from the shadows, and then it had him. It had been a very strange day, one of the strangest of his life, and only a fortnight or so after the disturbing Midsummer's Eve, when his father had caught him in the granary tower. First, he had fallen out of the festival oak, where he apparently should not have been climbing, for some reason he could never understand, since it was the finest climbing tree in the Inner Bailey. One knee, and both elbows, badly bloodied and aching, Morgan had limped into the residence, trailed by several worried chambermaids who, because he would not let them touch him, could only wipe up the red drops and smears he left behind, whispering and clucking like pigeons as they did. His mother, interrupted in conversation with several court ladies, took one look at him and waved him off with a grand shudder, ordering her maid to take him to Lord Tiamak to be made well. Later, after the little Ranaman had cleaned and carefully covered the wheels with lint and linen, he had given Morgan a sip of something from a small glass jar. It was sweet, but strange. Tiamak said it would help him to rest easier. The maid brought him back, and now that he was cleaned and his wounds hidden, his mother consented to let him lie on a little bed at the side of her retiring room, if he kept quiet. The pain of his injuries began to retreat, only reaching out now and then to poke him and remind him not to move too much. Morgan slept a little, then woke, then slept again as his mother and her ladies spoke in quiet tones. But the second time he rose to wakefulness, the retiring room was noisier. Someone was looking for John Josua. The prince was needed. Lord Tiamak was looking for him. Something about one of the chambermaids. Morgan wondered idly whether it had something to do with him, but for once he could not remember any guilty act. In any case, the bed was warm, and he did not want to sit up and ask. After a bit, he drifted back down into comfortable absence. Morgan woke, or half-woke, to see his father standing over him with eyes as wide and stricken as one of the martyrs on the chapel windows. This appearance was so sudden and unexpected that Morgan tried to cry out, but sleep still clung, and he made only a gasping noise. Even more astonishing, his father bent and kissed him on the side of the head and whispered into Morgan's ear, "I'm sorry. I am so sorry." As his heart sped at this strange confidence, and he came more fully awake, Morgan heard his mother saying, "And you came here? Are you mad, John? Did you touch her? What if some contagion is on you?" "No, I did not go near her," his father said, "but Tiamak and others did." "Sweet Elijah, I shall not let any of them near me." "The little Ranaman is no fool. He said it was something else. He said it was poison." "Oh, My dear God, protect us. An accident. But Morgan thought his father's voice sounded unsteady. Bitten by a snake, perhaps. With an effort, as if he wished to change what was being discussed, his father said, "And why are you so frightened, Idela? People die here from all manner of things. Death is all around. It is God's way." "Because I am with child," his mother said. Morgan heard what might have been triumph and anger in her voice. He was now completely awake, his heart beating swiftly, but he kept his eyes closed because his father still stood over him. You are... I'm carrying a child. I know it is true, and the midwives agree. Do you wonder that I take fright? A child. He said it as he might have said a chair or a stone. Yes, but why are you so cold, John? Is this not what we wanted? Another son to protect the succession? I'm sorry. John Josua was holding himself rigid, but his leg trembled against the bed where Morgan lay miming sleep. It is thinking of that chambermaid. They said she vomited black bile. John, are you mad? Oh, Lord, help me, I am not myself, wife. Again, I beg your pardon. Give me your blessing, John. We will pray that he or she will be born safely. Hurry, John. God must think us ungrateful. Of course, he said, but the strange edge in his voice had remained. I pray that God will bless us all, and bless the child. Idela kneeled in front of a picture of the Sacred Mother Elysia and began to pray, asking God's forgiveness for speaking of evil things when he had showered them with such good fortune, and would doubtless watch over all of them, and the boy would be raised as a good Adenite, or the girl would be, of course, if it was a girl, but his mother didn't want God to think that another boy would be a burden. As she enumerated all the things she hoped God would do to protect her family, Morgan heard his father say, just above him, in a low voice that he doubtless thought no other mortal could hear, And I pray that God will be just, and the child is born dead. Morgan lay in horrified, rigid silence as his father went out. He could hear his mother praying. She hardly even noticed her husband's departure. God, I can't read. Morgan lay in horrified, rigid silence as his father went out. He could hear his mother praying. She hardly even noticed her husband's departure. Morgan wanted to cry, but wouldn't, because it would give him away, as though he himself had done some terrible thing, simply by listening. When she finished praying, his mother rose to admit her ladies-in-waiting, who had been waiting patiently in the antechamber. They swept in like a cloud of bird-song, their voices light and sweet, talking of the beauty of the summer day beyond the windows. Morgan rolled over and pulled a blanket over his head, wishing it was something thicker, heavier, like clay or even stone, wishing he could bury himself in the earth and not hear anything again. Eventually, after a very long time, he fell back into sleep. Are you awake, Highness? Would you like company? Morgan sat up, startled to find himself in the middle of the forest instead of the bed in his mother's retiring room, and saw Sir Porto standing a short distance away. The old knight raised his hand in greeting, although none too steadily. He had stayed drinking with the soldiers longer than Morgan, which in itself told much about the prince's current mood. Awake, yes, Morgan said. As for company, though, I'm not certain. Missing the hint entirely, Porto seated himself on a rock nearby. I know that look you wear, my prince. You do? Ah, yes. I left home when I was young myself to fight against the white foxes. Left my family behind. Very sad, he said, hoping that by agreeing quickly he might cut short another recitation of how the old knight had single-handedly saved the mortal race from extinction at the hands of the Norns. They must have missed you, your mother, all of them. But Morgan's words seemed to startle the old man, and when he spoke again it was to say something the prince had never heard before, as if Porto had been jolted out of one rut and into another, like a carriage wheel. "My mother," the old man said. No, my mother was long dead. I speak of my wife and child." Morgan was surprised, and it made the memory of his father's words wriggle again just at the surface of his thoughts, making unpleasant ripples. "You have children. You've never spoken of children before, or a wife, as far as I can recall." "It is not a happy tale, Highness. That is why you have not heard it. I left them behind on Pedruin, which is where I was born. When I first went to war, following Prince Josua and the rest in hopes of making my fortune, my wife, Sida, and our little one stayed behind in her parents' house. Now I have spoken once or twice of the Battle of Nakiga Gate. Nay, please do not make such a face, my prince. I know I have told the tale before. Astrian has chided me for it enough times, so you know I was dubbed a knight on the field of battle by Duke Isgrimner himself, along with a few other men Morgan had heard, which made it a little less impressive than it sounded, but this time he felt no urge to interrupt. And after I returned south, I was given a land holding by the new king and queen for my service, a parcel in Sudshire, anyway, with rents worth several gold imperators every year. Not bad, more than I ever had from my own family. But when I returned to Pedruin, I found that Sida and our son had both died in the terrible sweating illness that struck there and in Naban and in much of the south that year. You would not know, but many called it the Norn fever and said it was revenge for their defeat. My little boy, we called him Portinio, which means little Porto, was not even 2 years old. They had already been buried a month by the time I returned. I didn't even get to kiss them. His voice became hard to make out. I never said a proper farewell. After a long silence, Morgan said, I didn't see my father before he died either. They wouldn't let me. Porto looked at him but said nothing, still mired in his own grief. They said I shouldn't see him that way. My mother said so. My grandfather and grandmother were with him. He hated thinking about it, but it only took a single reminder to bring it all back in a rush. The stairs had been wet because a short while earlier a maid had carried up a cloth and a sloshing bowl. Morgan had wondered why a servant was allowed in, but he wasn't. He had been standing on the stairs, and Countess Rona held his hand so tightly he could not get free, and his mother barred the stairway, her face angry. She was furious at him for trying to get past her, and the two women had stopped him and then held him like a prisoner, like a criminal. And in that moment, the door at the top of the landing, where 2 armored Erkenguards stood sentry, had seemed as unreachable as a mountaintop fortress. Then Tiamak had emerged from his father's chamber with a face so grave that his mother had cried out, and Morgan had instantly burst into tears at the sound. He forced the memories away. Pointless. Foolish. He was angry at himself for speaking of it. Tell me the rest, he said. Porto looked up a little startled. What? I beg your pardon, Highness. What happened after you found out? About your family, I mean. The old knight sighed. So long ago. It's a curse to remember, sire. I tell you true. In any case, there was there I was with nothing left. I returned to Erkinland, but I soon sold the land I had been given there and drank the profits. Had I not fallen in with Astrian and Olverus, I suspect I would be dead now. Porto shook his head. They have always given me a roof, or at least a place to huddle and be warm with them. It had never occurred to Morgan, except in a general way, that Porto must have lived a great deal of life before he had met him. He had seen the old knight as a gentle, drunken clown, without wondering what might have made him that way. "Did you love your wife very much?" he asked, although he was not entirely sure why. Did I what now?" Porto's thoughts had apparently wandered again. "Oh, yes, I imagine so, but it is hard to say so many years later. Sometimes I can scarcely remember what either of them looked like. I had a miniature of her in a locket, but that was lost somewhere." He shook his head again. "Somewhere." "I hope you forget someday," Morgan said, "so the pain goes away." "Oh, no," the old man shook his head. I beg your pardon, Highness, but I pray it never happens. That is all I have of them." Porto levered himself upright. "Speaking of pain, my prince, the cold is creeping into my bones and making them ache. I shall set up a bit nearer the fire. Do not fret overmuch, Highness. You are a most important young man, and the things that happen to others will not happen to you, I think. All those who love you will be safe and sound when you return. And you will return in glory. Of that I am also sure. Trust me, the old can see things that youth cannot." Morgan was silent as he watched the ancient knight pick his way unsteadily between the camping places of the others, like a shorebird fording a rising tide in deep mud. Next section. "Oh, my Lord Passavalis, I am so glad you remembered," the Dowager Princess said, rising as one of her serving girls showed him into her retiring room. She spread her hands, as if about to receive a gift. "How could I possibly forget such a flattering invitation, Your Highness?" The Lord Chancellor could not help noticing that Princess Idela had not exactly set the room ablaze with light, which would have been a more sensible approach for inspecting old books. Instead, the candles had been put out so sparingly that for some moments he did not notice the straight-backed old woman sitting on a chair in the corner, sewing. "Lady Willona," he said when his eyes could finally make out her face. "What a pleasure to see you two." The Lord Chancellor was relieved but slightly confused by the older woman's presence. Willona was the wife of Sir Ivoric of Haystall, a baron of no great family lineage or holdings, who had discovered there was more gold to be made in trade than in farming. Through a series of fortunate connections to Pertruini's relatives, Ivoric had become one of the leading importers of dyed cloth from the south and was now reputed to be richer than almost anyone. He and his wife were also great favorites of Osric, Princess Idela's father. Lady Willona looked up from her sewing, squinting. "Ah, it's you, Lord Chancellor. Forgive me for not rising. I have an ache in my legs today that is tasking me fiercely." "Nothing to forgive, my good lady." "Now, what will you have to eat, Lord Passavalis?" Princess Idela asked, then answered herself. "Meat, of course. You men." Her smile was sweetly winning, an amused maternal appreciation of what scamps the stronger sex could be. But Passavalis admired Idela's skills and knew only a fool believed the artifices that attractive face could display. "I will send a servant down to the kitchens this moment," she said. "I think there must be some of that joint left from the afternoon. It was very nice and will serve admirably even cold. And we will wash down our feast. with a bottle of this yellow Sandarian I had saved for just such a happy occasion. Passavalis could not resist poking, just a little, if only to take the measure of the evening's weather. "Oh, but, Princess, you were concerned for your husband's books. Should we not attend to that first before we indulge ourselves?" She waved a white hand at him. "Silly! We will do much better labor with full stomachs. A hard-working man like your lordship must know that." "I bow to my lady's wisdom." "As you should." Again the smile, flirtatious, promising. In truth, Passavalis was not much surprised by Idela's willingness to skip past the boring business of the books. It had been quite plain to him that she cared little about the matter of her husband's library, and meant instead to reinforce her siege of Passavalis' honor, and perhaps even finally to overthrow it. Passavalis was by no means immune to the feelings that her pretty face, slim figure, and the pale cleft of her bosom would engender in any man, but he stood this moment in a princess's retiring room, and with a lordship to his name precisely because he had negotiated each such crossroad with careful thought. He would not change that now, when the distance to fall was so much greater than it had ever been. The servant girl returned with a platter of sliced cold meat, some cheese, several small hand loaves, and a bowl of pickled ramps. Princess Idela scolded her gently for not having brought back a sweet as well, then dismissed her. The girl disappeared into one of the other rooms of the princess's chambers. Lady Willona took a plate for herself and ate in her chair, while the princess and the Lord Chancellor sat across from each other at the small table. As they ate, Idela talked animatedly of small things, events of such little matter that Passavalis knew she was working her way towards something of greater import. At last, as he poured a second goblet of the sweet amber Sandarian for both of them, she rounded to her point. "I cannot tell you how much I enjoy having your company this evening, Lord Chancellor." "Please, Princess, you must call me Passavalis. I cannot stand on my title here, of all places." "Very well, then. I shall do my best to call you by your Adenite name. But you must not be naughty yourself and put me at a disadvantage. For tonight we shall both shed our titles. I will be Idela." "As you wish, Idela." She clapped her hands. "Ah, just your man's voice is a pleasure to my ears." She leaned forward as though imparting a great secret of state, coincidentally showing him a great deal of her pale, smooth bosom. "I confess that I tire sometimes of the shrill sound of women's voices. That is all I hear. Is it any wonder I miss my son so much?" Considering that Prince Morgan had been gone less than a sennight, and that the princess had never been known as a doting mother to either of her children, Passavalis recognized the opening of a new gambit and generously played along. "It must have been very difficult for you seeing him off." "Terribly, shatteringly." She shook her head. "I cried myself to sleep the first night." "I am sorry for your pain, my dear lady." She darted a glance toward Lady Willona, who was chewing determinedly on a slice of bread, and seemed to be paying them no attention at all. Idela lowered her voice again. "It is not only the fright of seeing him go off into the wild world and wondering whether he will come back." "He will, Idela. Count Eolair and the others will make sure of that. Eolair is as good a man as the High Ward has to show." She made a little impatient mouth. The Lord Steward was not what she wanted to talk about. "It is not only the fright of seeing him ride off. I know I am a mother, and will always feel my son's absence as a terrible loss. It is that I fear that growing up without a father will hinder him on that day when he must take the crown." She made the sign of the tree. "Which we hope will be many, many years from now, of course." Of course, said Pasiphalis, and traced the holy tree on his own breast as well. God protect our king and queen. But surely you have noticed the trouble Morgan has been in of late, Pasiphalis. Surely you have seen the bad company he keeps, the fecklessness of his habits. Some of his company may be less harmful than you think, Idela. Fighting men cannot teach smooth speech, and there is no doubt he and his companions spend too much time drinking in low establishments. But there are lessons that soldiers can teach him, useful lessons. A king must not only rule his kingdom from the court, but sometimes must defend it in the field as well. I know, merciful Elijah, how I know. I have horrid dreams about it. And there is not only the battlefield to worry about, but all the rest. Assassins, madmen like the one who struck at Count Eolair. You must know how beloved your son is by all of Erkinland, my lady. But for any man, from the least to the greatest, there is no defense against madmen, but a loving God. Soothe yourself with this. There is no man in all the world who will be better guarded against ill chance than your son. For a moment it seemed she would speak again, but instead the princess suddenly turned away from him. Her shoulders trembled a little. Idela, my lady, have I said aught to offend you? When she turned back, he thought he saw a tear in her eye, but she quickly wiped it away. Oh, Pasiphalis, no, you could never offend me. But that is exactly what I was told about my husband, Prince John Josua, that no man in all of Ostenard was safer, better guarded, more protected. But all of that was worth nothing when death reached out for him. Pasiphalis was wondering whether his words had truly made her weep, or whether the shininess on her fingertip was a bit of the acrid juice from one of the ramps that she had rubbed in her eyes to bring tears. It was hard to tell with as skilled a campaigner as the princess, but it did not matter. Simple courtesy required him to reply. I am so sorry, Idela. The pleasure and informality of our evening have made me clumsy. Of course, you have more reason to worry than most mothers. Her smile was brave. I am greedy. I did not have him long, my kind, handsome husband, but at least it was long enough for me to give him 2 beautiful children. She looked down at her own hands as she wrung them together, then looked up again, eyes wide, and Pasiphalis thought quite impressively beseeching. There was no getting around it. Idela was a very, very handsome woman. But that is why I fear for our son. He has had no father for most of his life. His schooling has been of the roughest sort. What will become of him when he must take on the responsibilities of his blood? Pasiphalis could finally see the line of her attack, but he was still not quite sure he had perceived the object. I will do anything I can to help my lady. Like everyone else in this court, my concern and love for Prince Morgan is complete. She wiped her eyes again. You think me a fool? On the contrary, I think you a good, caring woman. Then may I confess something to you? Something unworthy, but that preys upon me, nevertheless? Of course. I fear that the king and the queen may keep my son too far away from responsibility, and from those things he most needs to learn. This was slightly astonishing. The idea that anyone was keeping responsibility for Morgan was a bit like claiming that a groom chasing a runaway horse was keeping it from its bridle. But Pasiphalis only nodded. I understand your concern. I did not want him sent off on this strange mission. I do not even understand all this talk of fairies and magical horns and whatnot. But it was not my place to object. Still, when he comes back," here she allowed a tremor into her voice, "if, God willing, he comes back safely, I would hope that they make better use of him, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of the kingdom itself." Passavalis nodded. "I think I follow you, but if you could explain for me just a bit. Could he not be given something more to do?" The weight she gave the word told him that she had finally reached her objective. "Morgan will rule the land one day. He will be king of the entire High Ward. Naban, Hernistir, Perdruin, all of them will bow to him. And yet he knows nothing of how to be a king." In truth, Passavalis thought, there is some sense in what she says. He doubted, though, that her reasons matched his own. "I heartily agree, my lady. He could and should be given more responsibility." She spoke eagerly now. "His grandparents, well, there is no getting around it, Passavalis. They are wonderful rulers. We are all grateful to them for what they have done. But they are old now, 50 years and more. Morgan could be such a help to them if he had a position in which he could do so." Passavalis nodded as if it was all just sinking in. "Ah, do you mean if they made him, what would it be called, a sort of co-ruler?" "Exactly." She reached out and clutched his hand, which caught him by surprise. Her grip was cool and dry, not in the least unpleasant. "You go beyond what I thought, but you are much wiser about these things than I am. A co-ruler. Exactly. He would learn by doing, and the king and queen could teach him all he needed to know. Will you help convince them, dear Passavalis?" "But, Idela, are you not in a better position to do that than I am?" "Oh, they would never understand if it came from me." She shook her head forcefully. "They would think I was meddling, that I was trying to improve my own place in things somehow." It was hard for him not to smile. "Perhaps you're right. I know I am, sadly. But if it came from you, they would listen. King Simon thinks the world of you. He raised you above all those other, she faltered, "those other more suitable candidates. You need not fear that you will hurt my feelings, Idela. I know there are many nobles with grander names than mine, and many with larger fortunes. It is well known that my family, while never the richest to begin with, fell on hard times after the Storm King's War. But you are the best for the position, and the king recognized that." She squeezed his hand so hard it was almost uncomfortable. "Surely he will listen to you when you suggest something that will help Morgan be a better king someday." "I cannot promise that." He did not want her to think she had hooked him too easily. "The king and queen are both rare in the stubbornness of their minds. I say that as a compliment. They see things their own way, not as others tell them things must be. But I will try my best." "Oh, may God bless you for your kindness." Idela reached for the wine and quite daringly poured for both of them. "Say we are partners in this endeavor, and I will be the happiest woman in the Hayholt." "I was always your partner, my lady, even if I did not know your cause, because I want the same things you want. Security for the High Ward, and happiness and health for your son." "Passavalis, you are the finest man I know." She drained her goblet with the vigor of a soldier just escaped from a deadly and blisteringly hot battlefield. And I think actually I've still got like 3 pages. Actually, I'm going to see if I can finish this. It'll take me till about 5 minutes past or so, but I'm going to go stick with it. "Come, let us take the rest of this and go and look at my husband's books." She had caught him off balance by returning to the books, but when she stood, he did too. She took him by the hand and led him away from the table. He hesitated a little as they passed Lady Wallona's chair. The older woman was fast asleep, her plate set down carefully on the floor, her sewing muddled in her lap. "Will she not? Leave the poor dear be. What does she know about books that are even older than she is?" Idela giggled like a girl, then tugged at his hand. "Come away. We do not need her supervision this moment." He let himself be led onward, toward what he expected would be her late husband's library, or perhaps a storage room where the books were kept. But when she pulled him through the doorway, it was into a room completely without light. "Oh dear," she said, sounding quite undisturbed. "I seem to have led you into the wrong room. I must have had too much of this lovely wine. Should I go back for a candle?" Even in the darkness, he was quite aware that she had turned to face him and was standing very close. She had let go of his hand, but now she reached up to touch his shoulder, then followed the line of his neck with her finger until her hand reached his face. "I think not," she said softly. "We can do without light and company for a little while, can we not?" She moved closer so that he could feel her slender form touch him in several places. He could smell the wine on her breath and the floral sweetness of her scent. "Idela." Her finger touched his lips, silencing him. "You know, it is not only a man's voice I have missed." He kissed the finger, then gently pulled it away from his mouth. "My lady, I am only—" "Hush! You are a man, and that is something truly wonderful. No, you are the finest man I know. Oh, and I have admired you so long. But the servants know better than to come stumbling into my chamber. Yes, I told you a lie. I confess it, my lord. This is not where my husband's books are. This is my own bedchamber. Do you hate me for my falsehood?" "I could never hate you, dear lady, sweet Idela." He took her hand again and kissed her fingertips, each one. He heard her breath deep and unsteady, so he leaned forward again and found her lips. Long moments passed before he spoke again. "I could never do anything to hurt you in any way." "Oh, glory," she said, and in that moment he could detect nothing false in her words. "I am all goosebumps, and my heart beats so. Here, can you feel it?" She took his hand and put it on her breast, naked now, her skin warm, the nipple nearly as hard as a cherry stone. In the darkness she had quietly unlaced the top of her dress and pulled it down. "Can you love me, Pasquale? Just a little?" "Yes," was what he said, then squeezed her flesh gently until she gasped. "Yes, my lady, I can." And that's where we're going to stop. So, didn't want to cut that off too early. That is the end of a section. We're going to start another section next. So, let me double check. "This part feels icky," wrote one of the listeners out there. I suppose that's actually a good thing. But for those of you who are new to it, it may not be. Anyway, so with that, I am going to wrap it up for the night. We're about 3 minutes after 8. I have to go and eat something and get on with some other stuff that needs to be taken care of, including getting the dogs outside. So I thank you, as always, for spending time with me. I do appreciate it. I really do. And want you to take good care of yourselves, because that's important. And then I want you to take care of your loved ones and friends and neighbors, because that's important too, in a different kind of way. But I know we will all do our best, and somehow we will all make it through this obstacle course that we call the world. And I will see you very soon. So peace, thank you, and be good to yourselves and others. Ciao.